Hello and welcome to episode 613 of the People Behind the Science podcast. Listeners, today we are thrilled to be sharing our interview with Dr. Eileen Morlan, originally published on August 24th, 2015. Eileen is an expert on biodiversity who combines mathematics, bioinformatics, and biological fieldwork to investigate a variety of questions in ecology, evolution, biogeography, and conservation. Eileen and her colleagues develop models to estimate speciation and extinction rates for organisms ranging from microbes to mammals. They aim not only to estimate these rates, but also to understand how and why speciation and extinction rates vary in time and space. And in our interview, Eileen shares more about her career, her life, and her work. So listeners, I hope you enjoy this episode of People Behind the Science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of People Behind the Science. Today, I am excited to introduce you all to Dr. Eileen Morlan. So, Eileen, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Wonderful. Well, we are excited to chat with you today, but I'm going to give our listeners just a little bit of information about you before we get started. So listeners, Eileen is a National Center for Science Research, or CNRS research scientist at the Institute of Biology at École Normale Supérieure in Paris. She received her master's degree in ecology from the University of Paris and her PhD in environmental sciences from the University of Bordeaux. Eileen conducted postdoctoral research at the University of California, Merced, the University of Oregon, the University of Pennsylvania, and also the University of California, Berkeley. And afterward, she was hired by the CNRS and worked at the Center for Applied Mathematics at École Polytechnique before accepting her current position. Now, Eileen is the recipient of the 2012 CNRS Prize for Outstanding Research and also the 2015 CNRS Bronze Medal. And Eileen is here with us today, listeners, to tell us about her experiences in life and science. So, Eileen, today we want to get to know you, and we want to hear about your experiences in life and science. So we are going to ask you a ton of questions. And to start off with, I want to know what you like to do with your time when you're not doing science.
So I grew up in Provence in south of France, this place you probably heard about that has beautiful countryside and beautiful coastline, that has inspired many writers and painters. It has incredible light and colors. And I think that growing up in the countryside of Provence, I really learned to love nature. So now, when I'm not doing science, what I strive to do is to be out there, and I tend to practice sports that bring me really close to nature. So you would think that because I'm an evolutionary biologist, I spend a lot of time in experiencing nature, being out there.
Sure.
But in fact, what happens is most of my time when I do research in front of my computer. So when I'm not doing science, I really like to go out there. And I tend to like daring sports, so I practiced a lot of rock climbing quite intensively when I was younger. I practiced scuba diving, surfing, windsurfing, randonnée skiing, snowboarding, and so on. And at the moment, what I got really kind of really passionate and crazy about is kite surfing. So I go there whenever I can, whenever there's wind. I think I like the challenge in all these sports, and it's also really how I best enter in communion with the elements and nature. It really makes me feel great and free, and that's what I do when I'm not doing science.
Well, it's so cool to hear more about how you spend your time. These extreme sports sound quite intense. I've never tried kite surfing myself, but it always looks so cool.
You should.
Well, wonderful to hear about life outside of science. And I know a lot of scientists say this. They're studying some wonderful phenomena in nature, but they do spend a lot of their time either in the lab or in front of the computer doing modeling. So very cool they're able to get outside and enjoy it. Now, can you take a moment to tell us about your science and tell us how you describe what you do to someone who might not be familiar with your field?
For me, it's not that difficult because I do research on biodiversity, and biodiversity has been popularized a lot in the media and so on. So it's familiar to scientists from other disciplines, to non-scientists, to people working in finance, artists, everybody, adults, children. People usually grasp what I'm working on. And what is nice also is that people are usually interested, right? This is reassuring. People care about biodiversity, so they're interested in hearing what I'm doing about biodiversity. So now what people ask more specifically, what about biodiversity? And in my case, I'm interested in more or less all its aspects. So I'm really interested in understanding what makes biodiversity around us the way it is. And I'm interested in really general questions, such as understanding why there are more species in some regions of the planet, like the tropics or the Mediterranean regions where I grew up, than other places on the planet. I'm interested in understanding why some groups of organisms are much more diverse than others, both in terms of species richness or in terms of how they look, their phenotypes. And I'm not either interested in one particular type of organism. I like them all. I can work on birds, mammals, plants, insects, microorganisms. I think they're all really fascinating. So in fact, I'm more interested in understanding general principles, ecological and evolutionary laws, rules that might be common across all these different organisms and explain why, in the end, biodiversity around us is the way it is.
Well, it sounds like your research takes a really holistic view, big picture view, being able to encompass all these different aspects of it, which is so cool. So we'll chat more about your work as we go through the interview, but I want to hear a little bit about what motivates you. I know I have a ton of favorite motivational quotes and saying, so I want to know if you have one, Hélène.
I do have one, and it's from a French writer, Jean Giono, which I can tell maybe first in French and then I will tell it in English.
Sure.
So in French, it reads, on va dans les étoiles et on ne sait toujours pas ce qui se passe sur le talus en face de chez soi. So in English, what it means is we are able to go in the stars, but we still don't know what happens on embankments in front of our homes. And so, to me, understanding what is in front of our homes is really important. And we do crazy things like going on the moon, but we still don't understand that. And this really motivates me every day to do the kind of work I do, because there is still so much to learn about nature. We really don't know a lot. And Giono, what's amazing is that he wrote this at the beginning of the century. And since then, we had learned a lot, and we have many new techniques, molecular techniques, over, like space measurements that we can do and so on, to study biodiversity, but we still have a lot to learn. And I think one of the things that we've learned the most is that we know even less than we thought we knew.
Right.
Yeah. So with the molecular techniques have revealed a tremendous diversity of microbial life that we really don't know how it evolves, how they interact, and so on. And the quote is really still, even more than it was in the beginning of the century, relevant. There's a team in my institute who has been working on this big project. It's called the Tara project. It's a big cruise that has been going around the planet to study biodiversity in the oceans. And one of the big results they got, they published recently, is that in the plankton biodiversity in the ocean, what happens is basically that even the most abundant organisms, I'm not talking about the rare biosphere, even the most abundant one, not only we don't know what they're doing, but we don't know who they are. So there's really the time of discovering this biodiversity is really not over. And so this quote of Giono saying, yes, we can do crazy stuff, but we still don't know what happens in front of our homes is really motivating to me.
Absolutely. I think it is a fantastic time to be a scientist. And I love this idea that you brought up of sort of the more we learn, the more we discover, the better our technology becomes, the more we realize we don't know about the world right in front of us. So that is a great motivating factor to have in your mind as you're going through your life as a scientist. And I want to know next about some of the people who've motivated or inspired you. So Hélène, can you tell us about some of the role models that you've had or some of these people who've had a big impact on you?
Yeah, so someone who I think is really, really motivating and had a big impact on me is Georgina Mace. She's the head of the Center for Biodiversity and Environmental Research at the University of College London. And what is really amazing about Georgina is that on top of being a great scientist, she has done research that has contributed greatly to the conservation of biodiversity. She symbolizes the role and the engagement that scientists can play in policy, and I think in making the world a better place. So she played a key role in formulating the red list criteria, so the criteria for listing threatened species. And she played a key role also in listing endangered species in this list around the world. And this list has really helped to raise public awareness, and it has also provided a single system of assessment which has had huge impacts on international collaboration on the problem of biodiversity conservation. And plus she's a woman, and I think she really helps to inspire women to engage into science and policy. So yeah, Georgina is definitely a big role model for me.
Well, fantastic to hear about one of your role models. Now, have you found yourself becoming very involved in policy and trying to make changes based on some of the research that you're doing?
That's really something that I'm struggling with. So I haven't, and the kind of research I do is working on processes that happen on millions of years and that are hard to connect to current changes. So I've done some things about trying to understand how major changes have affected biodiversity in the past so that we can better understand how changes are going to impact biodiversity in the future. But it's a little bit far-fetched because I'm working at timescales that are really different from the timescales that we're dealing with now with the current global changes. But that's something that, on one hand, I'm really interested in theory and in general principles, and in the other hand, I have this thing that I arrived here because I have this desire to do something about the planet, but they don't quite match yet.
Gotcha. I know, starting to think on timescales of millions of years, it's hard to even wrap your head around, so it definitely makes sense. So, Helene, can you take us back to the beginning and tell us a little bit about what got you started on the path to science?
So it was definitively not a linear path at all. I told you before, I grew up surrounded by beautiful nature and I learned to love nature. However, when I went to school, I did not study biology. I studied mathematics. And I think there are two reasons for this. The first one is that I like mathematics because one side of my personality is quite Cartesian. I like to know, what is true and what is false. That's good for a scientist. But I really like things that are kind of simple in terms of it's correct or not correct. There's a clear answer.
Sure. No gray area. Yeah.
Which is kind of the opposite to nature and this entangled bank that I work on every day. But first thing is this, that I like the clear answers. And the second is that I didn't really know how or whether it was even possible to make a living out of nature, right? And that mathematics are very valued in France. So students in France are really pushed to do mathematics if they are good at it. And I realized working in the US that it's not something that's universal. It's really a French thing to push the students to consider mathematics kind of as a superior discipline.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think most of the people in the US, you sort of are pushed towards the quote unquote STEM fields, but it's mostly the science, technology, and engineering. You don't hear a lot of people going into math. So very cool.
For us, math is the old and gray. I don't know how you say it. So I studied mathematics a lot and I was probably going to become a math teacher, I think. But then I took a little bit by chance, while I was preparing for the competition to teach in universities, I took a course on application of mathematics to the life sciences, in particular ecology. It was a course given by Régis Ferrière, who is now also at the École Normale Supérieure. And during that course, I realized that maybe there was a way that I could combine, this Cartesian part of me and this fascination I have for nature. So I asked Régis how I could go about doing this, and he told me to join the Master of Ecology in Paris, in which he was teaching. This for me was really a revelation, so that was a wonderful year. This master felt like I had not quite been at the right place so far and that I had finally found where I belonged. So I was learning about stuff I loved. I really liked the people in the class. But at the time, math bio was not as developed as today, so it took a while, even though I really understood from the master that's what I wanted to do, it took a while to find how to do it, how to combine my math skills to do something with nature. I was viewed as a modeler because I was coming from maths, but I really wanted to learn about biology, so that's how I ended up doing 100% experimental PhD. At the end of that, I realized that I was missing the intellectual challenge of mathematics and also generality that we can get with mathematics. And it's really only arriving in the US as a postdoc that I really found the combination of modeling and connection with real biological data that I was seeking. I've been, I think, really, really lucky to arrive in the US with two wonderful postdoc advisors, Jessica Green and Joshua Plotkin, who both have a training in maths and now work in ecology and evolution. What ended up putting me where I am today is this really non-linear path with a lot of chains, and that's it.
Well, wonderful to hear your story. And I really like this point that you brought up of not really know how to get where you would fit best, to kind of knowing that you wanted to tie together this interest in mathematics with being able to actually apply it to things that are happening in biology, but kind of not having a clear path on how to get there.
It's already good to know what we want.
Right.
Then it can take a while to get there. But for a while, I like finding that what was what I wanted to do was already a big step. So
sure. So was it frustrating for you? I know I am one of these people who loves sort of the black and white of things. Was it frustrating working in a purely experimental PhD then where there's a lot of gray area that maybe you weren't used to?
Oh, yes, it was really frustrating. Even, doing mathematics, when it's applied to biological systems, it's definitely a gray area. But now I like it to try to find and dig into the gray area. But when there's enough modeling and enough generality and we can apply it to empirical data, then I think to me it's a perfect combination at least.
Definitely. So this is a perfect segue. Can you tell us now about one of these projects that you're working on that you are just the most excited to be working on?
At the moment, I'm leading a European project, which main goal is to provide kind of the next generation of models for understanding diversification and trait evolution. So the first reason why I really like this project, and I'm really excited about it, is that we're developing tools that will be useful not only to us, but to the larger community. So it's really tools that then, empiricists going in the field and collecting their data can use to then say things that before maybe they were not able to say. So at the moment, we are generating a lot of data, but we don't necessarily have the methods or the models behind to make the best out of this data. So we're making our developments open access so that people can easily use them. And it's motivating to know that by developing these methods will facilitate the acquisition of knowledge on very different groups, kind of general things. People working on birds, mammals, plants, microorganisms, they can all use these tools. And that's one of the reasons I really like this. It's not going to be stuck in a little part of biology. It's having impact because everybody uses these tools. And the second reason why I'm excited about it is because it allows me to do research without having to think about finding funds. So we have these European projects, they kind of give fundings for postdocs and so on for 5 years, and we don't have to think about applying for grants anymore. And researchers today spend a lot of time applying and reapplying for grants, and it's frustrating to spend a lot of time doing that. I think it's a real luxury to just be able to not think about it and have 5 years ahead of me doing that and having a research group and working with this research group is also a fabulous experience. So all these aspects made me really excited about this project.
Well, this sounds like a wonderful project and a fantastic service to a lot of the other people out there who, like you said, will be able to use these tools for their own work as well. So can you tell us a little bit more about what it's like working for the CNRS? I know I've talked to a couple of people who work at the United States National Institutes of Health. How does it differ from the typical academic situation outside of just the grant situation?
I don't really know how NIH work. I've never really worked with people at NIH, so I cannot compare, but I can tell you what it is to work with CNRS. It's 100% freedom. So we don't have any teaching, no mandatory teaching. We don't have anyone, I guess this is the same in the US, but really our research is completely free. We're not at all told to work on any specific area. So it's really a feeling of freedom, and we can even go work in other places because we don't have teaching assignments. We can go spend some time abroad and work with collaborators. It's really this feeling of just doing research the way we want to do it. If we want to have a big group, we can. If we can get funding. If we don't want to have a big group, we can. And that's really nice. There's much less pressure, I think, than in the US, and this allows maybe to do research and in the direction that we want to do it and without stressing too much about results and publications and so on.
Well, this sounds magnificent. Well, it sounds like you have a wonderful environment to do your research, but I'm sure it can't all be roses. And I love talking to scientists about some of the challenges, some of the struggles, and some of the problems that they've had either in their current position or that they have had over the course of their career. So, Hélène, I want you to tell us today about one of these challenges or failures that you've had and how you got through it to be a successful scientist.
I think the most critical period, and that's shared with many other scientists, is actually this time where we're going from being a postdoc to trying to get a permanent job. As postdocs, scientists work really hard, they give their best, and often it's still not enough. And I think that this is really hard. So people need to apply to a lot of jobs, they go through a lot of failure, even though they know they're doing great research, and they are talented people, but there's always other people with better CVs, no job opening in their research area and so on, and people can really spend a lot of time searching for a job and having a lot of failure, and I think this is really hard emotionally, and that's a little bit, it didn't last too long for me, but after spending 5 years working hard as a postdoc in the US, and I knew I really wanted to go back to France, so I applied to the CNRS, and I didn't get hired the first year, which is fine, a lot of people don't, but I remember this being hard time because I had given so much and I didn't know how to do better, basically. Mm-hmm. And I was scared to not be able to do what I wanted to do, not be able to go back to France, and I think that's something that a lot of people have to face. So the way I worked through it, well, is determination, perseverance, and also because I knew that that's what I really wanted to do. So you just keep on giving your best, and eventually it pays off. But this is hard.
Absolutely. I think this is a critical point for a lot of scientists and one of the times that they look back on as a huge challenge in their career. And I think it's hard because you're getting these rejections or you're perhaps getting no response at all from a lot of these places that you're applying. And it sort of makes you doubt your ability to make it as a scientist. So when you were going through these periods of self-doubt, was there ever a point where you considered leaving science?
No, I did not consider it. I just felt that it was hard, but that eventually, if I keep on working hard and doing my best, it will work out. But you have to keep this optimism, definitively.
Absolutely. Well, I love this sense of optimism that you have. And I know I myself tend to be an optimistic person. It will work out eventually if you just keep on trying and keep working hard. But next, I want to talk about some of the successes that you've had, some of the great moments in your career and in your science. So can you tell us about one of these successes that's either a big success or even just a small victory along the way that meant a lot to you?
So it's related to what I said before about finding a job, and what I found being better reward and where I felt the most success is learning that my two first postdocs got great jobs. They both got great jobs this year, and this really means a lot to me. I mean, it's great to have a paper published in a super good journal. It's also a victory, of course, but choosing to be scientists, because they're passionate, they invest a lot in their research, they sacrifice parts of their life, and so I find it hard to see them struggle to get jobs, and so seeing them succeeding to me is the best reward, and that's where I get a lot of satisfaction to see people who, trusted me to come work in my group succeed and being able to leave their patient. That's really great.
Well, that is a wonderful success. Congratulations to you in both of those postdocs. So is there a particular way that your lab likes to celebrate success?
Oh, it's drinking champagne.
Yeah. Fantastic. So what's your favorite champagne?
How do you say? I can drink any. It's fine.
You're not particular. I like it.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations again on these successes. And I think it is so important to take a moment to celebrate them in science because there's a lot of challenge and there's sometimes a lot of time in between these successes. So you have to enjoy them while you can. So we've talked a little bit about your career and some of the wonderful things that have happened. And I want to talk about some of the opportunities to travel. You mentioned that you've had opportunities to travel throughout your career, going to these different postdoctoral opportunities for training. And also in your current position, there's freedom to travel. So can you tell us, Ellen, about your favorite place that you visited?
That's definitely an amazing part of being a scientist. We travel a lot, and this is really, really cool. Especially for us, scientists working on biodiversity, we tend to go to amazing places where there's a lot of diversity, tropical forests and corals and so on. I liked a lot of places I went to. I can tell you highlights. I really liked the sand plains of Australia, where I did some field work when I was a postdoc, and we were kind of jumping in the sand plains with the kangaroos. I remember this picture in my head.
Oh my goodness.
I love the tropical forest of French Guiana. We have this little field station right in the middle of a forest where you can go either with a pirogue or an helicopter. It's really far away down in the forest there. It's just completely amazing. The beautiful island of Moria in the Pacific is definitely also an highlight, but there's others. Araucaria Forest in Brazil. I don't have a favorite place. They're also different. I don't know if you know what Paul Cézanne answered when someone asked him what was, according to him, nature's masterpiece.
I don't. What was it?
He said it's infinite diversity.
Ah, I like it. That's deep. Well, I love hearing your answer, all these different places you've been able to visit. And I think it really highlights some of these opportunities that scientists get. Now, you mentioned, though, that lately you've pretty much spent a lot of your time doing research on the computer. Do you ever get to get out in the field now?
I do, mostly either through collaboration or not really because I'm doing a scientific project there, but because there's a summer school. So, for example, that's how I went to French Guiana. I don't have a project right now that's based on fieldwork, but I'm collaborating with people who have a project based on fieldwork, and that gives me opportunities to go there. I'm going to Gabon again in September. It's just supposed to be a lot of monkeys there and beautiful ones. So yeah, this still happens even though I spend a lot of time in front of my computer.
Well, that sounds wonderful. I'm glad you get to get out of the office for a little bit. So great to hear about some of these places that you've been in your scientific journey. But next, I want to talk about some of the people that you've been able to work with and some of the traditions that have developed in these groups. I think there are certain stereotypes out there about what scientists are like. And we try and break those stereotypes on our program because there are so many different types of people in the world of science. There are creative, brilliant, funny, amazing people, and we get to work with many of them. So can you think back on all these places that you've worked and all these people that you've worked with and share with us today one of your own funny memories or just a quirky tradition that happened?
I think I had the opportunity going to work with Jessica Green to maybe work with one of these really terrifically funny and super creative and awesome scientists. So I have so many funny stories with it, so many things together, and some that I could not really even talk about here. But if I can give one example, I have still like pictures of literally sliding down a tree like at first when we were doing field work in the Chaparral in California, where I really had this feeling of being in an Indiana Jones movie. So
wow.
Really
brings out your extreme sport nature, yeah.
We had definitely a lot of fun doing science.
Well, that sounds wonderful. So what brought you sliding headfirst down the tree? Were you collecting data or what was the purpose?
Well, the purpose was to collect microbial and vegetation data, but I think what we hadn't realized is how thick the chaparral was, and it's not like you can just go through the chaparral. So we had this different technique. One was to ramp on the ground, but sometimes it was too thick on the ground to go to a particular place to do our sampling, basically. So we had to go, instead of going down the tree, we had to go up the trees and then slide down the trees to go get our samples.
Oh, wow.
I know.
Sounds intense. You have to train before these field experiences. I like it. Well, wonderful to hear about the fantastic memories that you have working in Jessica's lab and also going out there, being able to collect data in the field. It sounds like so much fun. So very cool. And now I'm curious, we've talked a little bit about your work, and I want to hear a little bit about what you're reading. So when you can escape from the literature, Ellen, can you tell us what books do you like to read? And do you have a particular recommendation for myself and our listeners?
I read a lot of different books. I read science fiction, but if I have to think about one book that is related also to a kind of inspiration I have in my research and so on, is still from this writer, Jean Giono, who is the one who gave this quote about men knowing about the moon but not knowing what happens in front of their house. He wrote this book, Colline, which means hills in English, and describes life in Provence. It talks a lot about the alliance between man and nature, how important this alliance between man and nature is, and the risk for both of them of losing this alliance. And this was a little bit one of the first writings that were on this subject kind of early in the century. The book is beautifully written, it's beautiful in its message. I think it writes about mankind and nature with a lot of respect and sensibility. So yeah, I'm a big fan of his book.
Well, this sounds like a wonderful recommendation. I will put it out on our website for our listeners to find.
It's translated in English.
Oh, good. Then I can pick it up too. I was going to say my French is a little rusty, so fantastic recommendation. And we've chatted a little bit about some of the work that you've been able to do over the years. But next, Ellen, I want to talk about the work that you haven't been able to do, these dream research questions that you have in your mind. And I'm sure in your field you have quite a few of them. So can you tell us, if we gave you everything today, if things like funding, staff, technology, feasibility were not a problem, what is the question that you would want to answer?
The question I would like to see answered, and I think like one of the most important research questions of the century that really concerns all of us and not only scientists, is how we're going to live in the upcoming decades while preserving the ecosystem on which we rely, right? That's really one big question that we all have to tackle. And this question, of course, goes beyond my own research field. It needs to integrate a lot of different fields. But I would like to contribute to this, and I think that the way that our community can try to contribute to it is by providing predictions for the future in terms of how the ecosystems are going to respond to global change and so on. And as of now, we're kind of failing as a community to do that. I think not because we are not working well, but just because nature is so complex and it's really a really hard problem to tackle. But that's at least my dream question that I would like to see answered. I don't really know how to go about it. I don't even know whether it's feasible or not. But we kind of need to have this more complete understanding of life on Earth, its ecology and its evolution, so that we can really start to make reliable predictions and find creative ways for the future.
Absolutely. Well, very well said and great question. Definitely worthy of getting an answer. But I think you're absolutely right. It is so complex. There are so many pieces that need to come together for us to have an answer that it's very daunting.
Yeah.
But wonderful question for myself and our listeners to think about and for all these scientists in the field to work towards. But now I want to chat about advice. I think as a scientist, you get to work with so many wonderful people throughout your career, and you have a lot of opportunities to get great advice with these different mentors, colleagues, people that you've been encountered. So can you think back now, Ellen, on all the people that you've worked with and try and pinpoint one piece of advice that is just the best piece of advice you've ever received?
There's definitely these pieces of advice that I got from advisors and so on, but there's also not an advice, but a beautiful example that my parents gave me. So my parents both did a lot of studies. My father was an engineer and my mother did like really high studies in politics and so on. But what they liked and what they were passionate about was antiques, architecture. And at some point, even though they had done all these studies and it would have been easier and more comfortable and secure for them to continue on this kind of life of engineer and so on, they decided to drop everything and they opened an antiques shop. So they basically lived per patient and started to restore a house in south of France, a whole house. So that really gave me the lesson of what is the most important. I don't have to think of whether, I will be paid well as a scientist or not, but what is most important is to do the job that I love. And so that was a beautiful example that I think also brought me where I am, where I didn't really think too much about whether I will succeed or not, whether it will be possible. I just went for it. And then advices, the best one I think from Jess Green was to value creativity. Always, this thing of trying to look at things differently and trying to have a different vision. So like really value the most creativity. And from George Plotkin, my other advisor, to follow our instincts. So we apply to grant agency, we get grants to do a particular kind of research, but this might change over the years and we don't need to feel bonded to do this research that we have to still, keep free and follow our instincts of what has to be done at the moment. And same thing, not think too much about, what has to be done, but follow the instinct. And two great advices, I think.
Well, these are all fantastic pieces of advice. And I love this example you gave of your parents kind of dropping everything to pursue their passion. That's fantastic. So do you have a particular interest in art and antiques and architecture? Is this something that's translated down to your generation?
I do, not as much as they do, but they definitively gave me a little bit of this interest in all stuff, definitely, yeah. I mean, I'm living in France where we have these beautiful cities. I'm living in Paris. I think they give me the realization of how special it is to have all this history and how important it is to preserve it and to be aware of this history behind us and how great it is.
Absolutely. Well, wonderful to hear this story. And I really like this idea of science as a creative endeavor and encouraging creativity and valuing creativity in science. So is this something that you've applied to your own research? Have you sort of made a point to try and be more creative or to cultivate this in your students?
Yeah, I try to. I have to say, there's a lot of things that we can do that don't really require creativity and that need to be done as well. There's tools that are available and data that can be collected, and we know that if we collect this data and we apply these tools, we'll be able to answer this question that hasn't been answered before, but there's not really anything new there. And I think it's important to do this research, and it's great that it's being done, but it's not what would make me excited about research. So I really try to find a different way to do things, or if there's not something really kind of new about a research project, I'm not that excited to carry it.
Yeah, and I like that you described this example earlier of you being the one who was creating the tool that then other people were going to use to maybe answer those types of questions. So
I think people are good at doing different things, and it's good to collaborate all together to do all of this together.
Definitely. Well, Ellen, it has been fantastic to talk to you. Is there any other last piece of advice or maybe a last note of inspiration that you want to leave our listeners with today now coming from you?
Maybe for the young listeners who need to make a choice of direction in their life and are maybe hesitating of whether they should become a scientist or not. I think it's they're told a lot that it's difficult, and it's good to be aware of that. But young scientists shouldn't stop this wish for exploration by being scared, right? So yes, it's not easy every day, but there's nothing better for me every day to wake up thinking we can improve knowledge. And I think every scientist has the opportunity to make long-term changes in the lives we live and the world around us, and that's really, really great to be able to live that way with these kind of objectives rather than something different, especially if we have this wish to be explorers. We shouldn't be stopped by being scared.
Well, I love it, Ellen. A wonderful message for our listeners out there. Now, can you tell them how they can reach out if they want to learn more about you and your work?
Sure. So my email address is Morlon, my name, at biology.ens.fr, and biology is in French, so it's BIOLOGIE.
Perfect. Well, listeners, definitely reach out if you have any questions. And Ellen, thank you again so much for joining us today and sharing a piece of your story.
Sure. You're welcome.
Well, it was a pleasure to chat with you. And listeners, it was a pleasure to spend time with you today as well. We'll see you next time on another episode of People Behind the Science. Your voyage to the lives of today's exceptional scientists has just begun. You can find everything we talked about today, including our guests' favorite books, biographies, photos, and more, when you visit us at www.peoplebehindthescience.com. I look forward to seeing you next time on People Behind the Science.